Are we ready to continue? All is good with Zoom? Okay, so I'll start. Actually, unlike Michał, who has lots of expertise in the topic of economics of elder ages, I have rather limited experience, and I got to this topic by simply being interested in this particular subtopic. That men die before women, how to explain it, why does it happen, and what are the consequences. So today we live in the world where in literally every United Nations recognized country, women live longer on average than men. The last country who joined this club was, I think, Togo, around 5 years ago. So now, in every country, women live longer than men. On average, in the world, on average, women live a little bit more than 3 years longer. In what we call developed nations, the average difference is 4.5 years. So even in developed nations, women live 4.5 years longer. So why do we care? Well, of course, jealousy. Well, that's not the true reason. The true reason is that this difference in longevity actually has a lot of potential economic implications. Well, first of all, men die before women. Men die prematurely is bad for men. They are unhappy with that. Second, well, society and labor market is unhappy with that because these men, they do not just all live until age 64 and die together. They start dying during working years, so there are losses in the labor force. Although this is kind of problem for men, but this is problem for women too, because men and women sometimes live together, which means that premature mortality of men brings more widows, brings more that like people live and think about common budget, but then one of the breadwinners in the family dies, and of course it has many different negative implications, but Monica will talk more about that. Well, it creates family financial instability and widowhood because men live shorter lives than they could. They, of course, accumulate less capital. They have lower motivations to accumulate capital. Like, think if each of us would live until 100 years, we would save more and think about our older ages more than we do currently. And it may lead to inefficient social policy design and uptake because we rarely design social policy and we rarely make laws which are gender specific. And if laws are not gender specific, then it means that half of population, for example, men or women, depends on which policy we're talking about, they would not fully participate, would not fully benefit from some particular policy. Well, we can think about pensions. I guess the starkest example is Belarus. Belarus is actually one of the leaders in differential gender mortality. In Belarus, men die more than 10 years before than women on average, and average Belarusian man spends only 1 year on pension, which means that in Belarus, men don't have any motivation to contribute to pension system if they would be asked to. They have all the motivations to avoid this policy design, to like work without paying taxes, without contributing to social security. And even though, of course, we can force men to participate in pension systems, still lack of motivation makes these policies less efficient than they could be. So how large is these gender differences in longevity that we're talking about? In some countries, they're quite large. In Georgia, Belarus, Armenia, actually Latvia, Lithuania is also one of the world leaders in gender gap in longevity. This difference could be up to 10 years or even more than 10 years, well, which is more than 10% of our lives. So women live until, like sometimes in these countries, something close to 80 years old, and men live something close to 70 or 65. As you can see, like it looks like there is some factors that group these countries, like for example, among the leaders, there are many post-Soviet countries. Among the leaders in equality, there are many poor and African countries, but actually there is no simple causal effect. So this, for example, shows on the x-axis there is GDP per capita. On the y-axis, there is gender difference in life expectancy. And as you can see, it's not that in richer countries this difference is smaller or larger. There is no particular relationship between average income in the country, average GDP, and this difference in longevity. So what effects on economy does this differential mortality have? Again, we can actually think about many different effects about this utility losses, etc. On this slide, I will just present the most direct economic losses from the fact that men die younger, so they do not finish their working careers, they make dent in the labor force. On average, in European Union, premature mortality of all people takes a dent of 1.2% GDP, and 70% of that is due to male premature mortality, so due to this gender gap in life expectancy. If we would somehow magically manage to make men on average die at the same age as women, so not even just increase in average life expectancy, but close this gap, some of the countries would gain significant percentages of their GDP. So in Belarus, for example, effect would be around plus 2.5%, because we in Belarus we lose around 4% of labor force due to premature male mortality. Latvia, Lithuania, European leaders in GGLE, they would gain around 2.3% GDP. Poland, also one of the leaders, just not on the first positions, would get 1.7% GDP, and Sweden actually is more or less equal even in this dimension, so for Sweden there is not much to gain. So why does it happen? The answer is that to the end we don't know. So there are several explanations, there are several factors that clearly contribute to differential mortality between men and women. But meanwhile, at least, we cannot explain 100%. Overall, so when we don't know the answer, we just go in all directions. All directions here means that, well, there should be some biological factors and some behavioral factors. Why there should be biological factors? Well, as I said, like in every country in the world, women live longer than men, which means that there should be something in biology. Otherwise, like our countries are very different. There should be some biological advantage of women. On the other hand, we have seen that there is actually quite a large variation in this difference in life expectancy, which means that, well, somehow our behavior and conditions in particular country may contribute to increase or decrease in the gap in life expectancy. So let's go through these main factors that researchers have uncovered. Biological factors, there are a couple of them. So from evolutionary biology argument, they have this general idea about how humans were developed as a species. So they say that female longevity is a factor that was evolving in human species because higher female longevity has better effect on increase in offspring survival rates. We're not evolutionary biologists, so we will not discuss this topic. But just to mention. So what else? Well, there is genetics. There are some things where women are clearly superior in terms of survival probabilities. The simplest thing is that women have two X chromosomes. Chromosomes sometimes are broken and damaged. So when male X chromosome is damaged, there is no way how a body or organism can repair it and can fix it. So males have more genetic diseases and genetic conditions than females. Females have two X chromosomes, so when one is damaged and broken, in at least some cases, another intact chromosome starts to work. Women have stronger immune system, which first contributes to their survival. On the other hand, it actually brings some additional diseases to women. So women don't die, but they have much more autoimmune diseases where immune system is too strong and starts to attack the body. Finally, there are, of course, much more genetics, but we are not in that topic. Finally, it was found that estrogen, female hormone, leads to lower rates of cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease in developed and rich countries is usually #1 cause of death. So less of these heart-related fatal diseases in females. Although, we'll talk more about it, there is a thing called morbidity-mortality paradox. So this is a schematic graph from Canadian study. Morbidity-mortality paradox is a paradox that women, on average, at every age, have worse health than men. So they suffer more diseases, more conditions. So women here are this red line. And men are blue line, and on the y-axis it is, so number of health deficits. So you can think about number of bad things happening to your health. So at every age, women on average have worse health, but they suffer more from diseases that do not lead to death. So they have worse health, but live longer with this worse health. Men have better health, but die younger. And this paradox is actually observed in many other dimensions. Like, for example, this is about just health. It also works with mental health. Women are much more likely to have depression, but much less likely to commit suicide. So let's go to behavioral factors. If you want to know why men die younger than women, well, the funniest and the easiest part of this research, you can start on YouTube by Googling why women live longer than men. There you would observe a lot of what economists call risky behavior. Somehow risky behavior is related to men. We don't know, through genetics or through culture, probably more through culture and gender norms, but men are more likely to be engaged in riskier behaviors, those riskier behaviors that lead to premature deaths. Men die in road accidents on average 3 times more often than women. Men commit suicide on average practically 4 times more often than women. That's like world average. And again, as I said, there is morbidity-mortality paradox that actually women are way more likely to have depression, just not commit suicide. There were studies which tried to assess how much of the observed difference in mortality can be attributed to behavior. So one of the most prominent studies, they estimated that in developed nations, average gap in life expectancy is 4.6 years. And out of that, 3.2 years can be attributed to behavioral factors. So if men would change their behavior, this gap in developed nations would decrease to just 1.2 years. Men are, of course, more likely to have worse habits, more likely to smoke, more likely to be obese, and more likely to consume more alcohol. Although effect of alcohol is less trivial than one may think. We'll talk about it later. So according to different studies, like this differential rates of smoking can explain up to 30% of differential mortality. Differential rate of drinking, or especially heavy alcohol consumption, can explain up to 20% of differential mortality. About obesity, we don't know much. It changes rapidly, and it's actually something new. We don't, well, data is just being accumulated. Men are more likely, even in modern economy, to be involved in higher risk jobs. In previous years and centuries, it was even more so, like some traditional male jobs from 50, 60 years ago, where like coal mining, this metal industry, of course, military activities. So men are more likely to have jobs or, well, military activities again, something related to job where they are more likely to die. And the last, but here for sure not least, is lower healthcare utilization. So, well, for centuries, doctors and medical professionals, they were studying actually mainly male diseases, like until 18th century, people didn't care about female diseases and the reasons why female dies. So much more experiments, much more studies were made about male health. Yet males do not utilize it. We don't go to hospital, even in developed nations. Number of checkups that men undergo is much less than what females undergo, and amount of money that men spend on their healthcare is much less than amount of money that women spend on their healthcare. So there is theoretical healthcare for men, but men use it much less. Yeah. So again, some of these factors, some of these behavioral factors, they also could be due to something, some genetics. So it could be that, I don't know, men are, well, more susceptible to this depression, and smoking and alcohol consumption, obesity can be also, in theory, functions of these depressions. But some of these behavioral factors, they are clearly cultural, and there are also studies that men in societies with less enforced gender norms, they are also much less likely, for example, to commit suicide, and this suicide differential decreases with decrease in gender norms. Yeah, so that's just as an advertisement. If you want to read the full report, it is available on the Free Policies Brief website. Do we have time? Yeah, and since we have time, I'll just also go over highlights about a couple of the countries. So first, Belarus. Belarus is always, for last years, one of the world leaders in differential mortality. In Belarus, as I said, men die more than 10 years before than women on average. Men are more likely to report episodic heavy drinking. There is a huge differential in suicides in Belarus. And this category death caused by pollution, you can think about it as working in bad conditions because, well, it's not that we live in some factory town in China that people die from smog or like super bad ecology. Especially in Belarus, ecology is fine on average, but deaths caused by pollution, you can think about bad working environment. And again, in Belarus, men are more than twice as likely to work in these bad environments and, well, die from these bad environments than women. Poland, well, again, not one of the top leaders, but still on the right end of the distribution of gender gap in life expectancy. In Poland, on average, women live 8 years more than women. And the main contributors, as you can see, is everywhere heart diseases, lung cancer, well, which is this differential, is presumably caused by differentials in smoking. Also, but in Poland, maybe a little bit by mining jobs too. Well, suicides, of course, huge differential, and accidents. So again, as everywhere else, much more men drink heavily than women, although you can see, as I said about this alcohol, that alcohol is, seems like it should be this very easy explanation of differential mortality. It appears to be less that obvious when you look at the country specific. So in Poland, more men report about heavy episodic drinking than in Belarus, although, well, differential mortality is lower in Poland. And I'll show you Georgia. In Georgia, this gradient is even larger. But so just alcohol is not an answer. Presumably there are more in that, for example, what type of alcohol and what type of culture of consuming alcohol. Smoking, again, more men smoke than women. That's the same in every country. We have one of our countries report from Georgia, but they also look at South Caucasus. So at Armenia and Azerbaijan. As you can see, actually, there are like sometimes interesting trends going on, but that's a subject to more studies. For example, these three countries started 90s at like all three of them had high levels of differential mortality, but Azerbaijan, well, started to go down, while Armenia and Georgia, they actually continued to climb up, and now Armenia and Georgia also among the world leaders in gender gap and life expectancy. So speaking about heavy episodic drinking, well, Georgia is of course famous for that. A lot of men report that they involved in this activity. Very few women. Azerbaijan, Armenia, like women practically do not report heavy drinking. Well, guess because of the culture. And even men report to be less heavy drinkers. This, of course, tells you something about surveys because people, especially in these countries, may have different idea about what is really heavy drinking. Like something that is heavy drinking for Polish person can be like no drinking for Armenian person, for example. They of course ask about how many portions of alcohol do you drink, but still. So yeah, Georgia is, for example, very different in this dimension from Azerbaijan and Armenia. But again, as I said, the overall result kind of from just alcohol consumption, we would not guess these results. Suicides everywhere, as I said, in the world, on average, men commit more suicides than women. Again, this differential is much larger in Georgia than in Armenia, Azerbaijan. Well, bad working conditions, well, this is what's called this deaths from air pollution. Again, everywhere is the same, but actually these countries appear to be more equal in this dimension than, well, for example, Poland, Belarus, or Latvia. Maybe because they're less industrial and there is less industrial production. And finally, I'll finish with Latvia. Latvia looks like all the countries in our region, like Belarus and like Poland. Men die from everything, and Latvia is one of the world leaders. Men die from everything, so it's a life of men in this in Baltic states, in Belarus and Poland is very hard. The number one overall, one of the leading cause of deaths overall now in developed world are heart diseases, and of course here we see also a large gender differential in deaths. So I think, I'll finish here. We should take more care about men, about men's hearts. This differential mortality means that it is a gap that is kind of easy to close, or easier than others. So like, we don't know if we can come up with some medical research and institutions that would increase overall longevity to 100 years. But if half of population lives until this, like 10 years more, then it's easier to guess that we can bring this another half of population men closer to this frontier, and then get lots of economic bonuses like this. So I'll finish here. Thank you. And again, as I said, Michał was talking about life, I was talking about death, and but then there is, sometimes it happens at the same time in the same families, and Monica would tell us what happens after that.